We hear the phrase, be careful with your words, or don't stick your foot in your mouth. Or if you don't have something good to say nothing. Or even as one woman put it, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will, you know what, kill me. There's also even the phrase narcissistic wound. And did I mention the word insulting and or disrespectful? And anybody who has spent time in prison would know exactly what is meant by you better not disrespect somebody or you're going to pay. On the other hand, Napoleon Hill has given the example of harmonious relations. I think harmonious relations is to use words optimally, despite all differences in one person versus another, as to what we want, for instance. You might say that despite differences, not hitting below the belt. To hit below the belt might be called maladaptive use of words, often disrespectful, if not almost always. So, does everybody have the same level of, shall we say, toxic words? I do not believe so. I have to say, it may ruffle a few people's feathers, yet perhaps it is in the best interest to be stating it anyway, that sometimes people who may have the most schooling of a brick and mortar sense may have the most inept words when it comes to having social relations that are harmonious. I have to remember here, Jordan Peterson had once talked of the hyper-intelligent, saying that they can have problems with what I could only say is grandiosity or there's a variety of terms. Arrogance. What's another term? You know, you get my drift. But what really are we talking about here? I think we're talking about words that do not match reality, particularly in two different spheres. Either the words have a free will element to them, that's the best I can put it just now, or they're catastrophe words. So, does everybody have the same amount of such words or double sets of words? Free will-oriented words when it comes to people and catastrophe words? I do not believe so, having lived in such a variety of circumstances and lived with such a variety of types of people in general. I believe there is a group of people who has a minimum of both free will words as applied to people and catastrophe words, whereas there's another group of people that has a vocabulary chock full of such on both respects. I just coined a word here a few minutes ago that if we're talking then of two different ways of encoding reality when it comes to people, we might be talking them speaking two different languages. One group is speaking, if you're going to combine the both groups in one word, free will-oriented and catastrophe-oriented symbologies, we could say they are speaking free cat language. They are encoding aspects of reality when it comes to people in free cat terms. Hence, they're speaking free cat. On the other hand, there's another group of people who are speaking non-free cat. They have a minimum in comparison of free will-oriented words to use to categorize people, if you will, symbology-wise, like a word versus a long sentence. When you read a dictionary, you got the word and and the long verbose definition. So at any rate then, to hammer home yet another repetition on this, I think some people are speaking free cat. They are encoding reality, aspects of people in free cat symbology. And the other group is speaking non-free cat. And what do you have? You got a lot of friction. A lot of friction. So, I remember reading in the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. He was saying, either himself or referring to someone else, that one of the most important things is to see things from other people's angle. Well, what angle is that? Maybe, just maybe, that angle is, what language are they using? What are they encoding reality in when it comes to people? If we can't see that some people are using a different language completely than we are, then that's not a good thing, is it? We're speaking apples and oranges here between each other. Or we're just saying, like, I don't think you understand me. I remember, for instance, Diane Keaton and Jack Nicholson in a section of the movie Something's Gotta Give. And there was a pancake scene, I would call it, near midnight maybe, and they're cooking pancakes together, or maybe they want to. And at one point she says words to the effect of, I don't know if you hate me or you're the first person to get me. And then he says words to the effect of, I don't hate you. Well, what in the world does that mean then, to get her? To understand her. I have thought of that a couple of years ago. A couple of years now. And I think it has everything to do with the symbology used to encode what you see about another person. It's not that he just understands things about her, details about her, like her favorite ice cream, and that she likes pancakes maybe, or, that she has this or that career, and what's her family background? No, not at all. I think it has everything to do almost with, do you get me, in terms of properly encoding in language, in symbology, accurately, what we're talking about when you do see the facets of my life. Not just do you see the facets of my life, but are you encoding them in a reality-based language or system of symbology? In other words, one relatively free, in comparison to some others anyway, relatively free of free will and catastrophizing, but especially free will. And why do I bring up free will as a word? Because I believe otherwise we're simply going to say about anyone and everyone, regarding something we find uncomfortable about them perhaps, well, you could have done better if you tried harder, or you're just lazy, or you just don't give a darn, and so I'm going to hate you. And there's never any delving further then into, well, what's the chain of events by which the person is as they are? That would make a lot of difference in the degree to which we can tolerate something or not, and come to some mutual agreement sometimes. Because if we just say, well, you could have tried harder, and because you're not going to try harder, I'm just going to take a hike, or, that's the end of things, I don't think that's going to work. So I think the whole point then of that scene in the movie and in general in life is, do we get someone, in terms of encoding them, really pretty darn good in a language called non-free cat? Yeah. So, why do you think then some people love to go see their hairstylist, and they're called people who are great listeners? Why do you think some people can sell you stuff and you bought it because they make you feel like $1 million and you didn't really need the thing? Why do you think, and this is not a joke, someone once told me um, he knew a man who was a plumber, and he would get called over to some houses, over and over again, and they would make up just fake plumbing jobs just to have him over and over again. Kind of reminds me of Nick Nolte in the movie Afterglow. So you just have to say, well, what is it then that's going on here that is such an attractive quality? Despite the so-called person's complexity IQ, as I would put it, not off the charts. So what gives? Some would just say, well, that's just emotional intelligence in action. But what the heck then is emotional intelligence? Maybe a major, if not almost total component of emotional intelligence is the use of let's see the word I just came up with, non-free cat language. To the extent you have that, you have high emotional intelligence. In other words, you're not insulting and you're not catastrophizing. And you know, my experience with catastrophizing is, if you're a catastrophizer, the psychiatric term probably, or psychology term, would be that you're hypervigilant. Others might just say you're jittery, or you're trigger happy, or you just go off on a dime. All the same concept. Yes, catastrophizing mindsets are catastrophizing persons with a bailiwick of catastrophizing words to encode reality. Now I come upon this all by way of a variety of experiences that many don't have. Most all of my relatives on my mother's side, by far whom I saw 99% more than those on my father's side, had usually no more than a 6th grade education. And we're from, quote unquote, the old world. Poland, Ukraine, areas such as this, Eastern Germany. They spoke, again, German, Ukrainian, and with difficulty, English. And I was raised by my grandmother, spoke German. My first 4 years, basically, waking hours. And then other matters also. So, yeah, you just have to say to yourself, who is speaking what kind of language, and can they get me in terms of encoding what they see about me as a human being in real terms, versus free will-based terms which would say, well, you could have done better, you're not trying hard enough, you're lazy, you're despicable, and I'm just going to write you off and get you out of my life. Well, do you think a top quality hairdresser does this? No, I don't think so. Another case in point, then, example I think fits perfectly and is so beloved an example, they made a movie of top quality, Morgan Freeman and Jessica Tandy in Driving Miss Daisy, which, by the way, my 87-year-old mother still loves to watch. Yeah, at her age, implications and all. So the whole point being, Morgan Freeman, at least impeccably in the movie also, was able to demonstrate that he was, quote unquote, understanding to an nth degree, and thus not reactive and more, and not contemptuous and not having ruffled feathers concerning how Jessica Tandy was treating him, and probably many another person also. Hence, in a sense, he saw her not in a free will manner, but a deterministic manner. In other words, there's a reason for everything, and I've kind of got it figured out by observation, learning, and so on and so forth. It might be surprising to some people to know also that Jack Nicholson, as per that movie, Something's Gotta Give, in which he was told by Diane Keaton, I don't know if you're the first person to get me, or rather whether you hate me. He grew up, I think, somewhat in the hands of his grandmother and used to spend time, I think she was a hair cutter, and he used to crawl around on the floor and be a young babe there, and all the customers would treat him quite well often. So he was always observing in a social milieu there that was supportive, and by, I believe it was a grandmother, who probably has been around the block a few times more than a brand new mother, so to speak, at 19 or 20 sometimes, and with a first child. For more on that, consult Parenthood with Steve Martin and Rick Moranis and so on and so forth. Wonderful movie. So for more information too, we might want to consult Hugh Brody, his book, The Other Side of Eden. The subtitle is Hunter-Gatherers, Farmers, and the Shaping of the World. I have it in my hand right now. I don't know if I mentioned also, some of this material comes by way of my father having a Ph.D. in English literature, and he did a lot with me, especially in my senior year of high school, regarding writing. And my mother having a sixth grade education, basically speaking, I grew up my first 4 years with my grandmother, my waking hours. We had almost no communication. For some reason, it was probably communicated to her, do not speak German to me, and she hardly knew any English whatsoever. She read like one book in her entire life, the Bible. So, yeah, my grandfather probably had 6 books on the bookshelf. But he was a very, very observant and smart man. I'd have to say, too, my paternal grandfather, on the opposite side of the family, was a sanitation engineer, i.e. a garbage man. And many of my relatives on my mother's side were plumbers, tool and die operators. Let's see. Oh, yes, most of them resided in the Detroit area. And when I was a young tot, my mother worked in the car industry for 2 different car manufacturers. You might say on the floor. Although she had a more technical job. She wasn't like putting parts together, no problem with that. I don't know that she would have had the speed, though, to do that. So she operated something of a punch tape nature in the auto industry. So they used a different vocabulary. They used, again, I believe, far more based on very little reading, almost no reading, a vocabulary that I, again, have to call a non-FreeCAT system of encoding. Noting, by the way, that Sequoia, the Cherokee Indian, developed a encoding system for the Cherokees to go from oral tradition communication to the written word communication, but he did not shift the words that would be encoded. He simply gave a transcription device. Whereas, on the other hand, I believe there are 2 different languages completely for transcription, shall we say, or encoding. One is heavy in what I call, again, free will and catastrophizing as an add-on or interpretive philosophy in both cases, and the other is not. And then we can have sometimes mayhem as the 2 groups interact with each other, based in part on a misunderstanding of what can be and what is frightening. I just have to think as an example. My sister is very scared of snakes, whereas I, at age 6 and 7, used to catch snakes by grabbing them behind the head and then just bringing them home or whatever, bringing home crayfish, turtles, and whereas my sister, oh my goodness, yeah. So I don't want to use terminology, but she catastrophizes, I think, a snake bite a wee bit more than I do. I think then that is where it is so difficult, to the point where we see in scriptures and in common day parlance, do not be judgmental. Or as the Christian Bible would say, judge not lest ye be judged. Well, I don't know why we would have to say or you will be judged also. But, we could ponder our whole lives then the difference between evaluating the traits of a person versus misevaluating them based on a poor use of terminology upon which we say we are judgmental. I was just looking at a book today, in fact, again, by a physician I see every once in a while who is an integrative medicine physician. He has several books out, and one of them was talking right in there of not being judgmental. But it wasn't explaining, well, what in the world does that mean exactly? And if you're not going to be judgmental, are you just going to shut down and say, well, I'm not going to observe? Because otherwise, then, what about the Christian scriptures that say, separate the wheat from the chaff, but don't be judgmental at the same time? Well, what gives? How can you incorporate both? I believe you incorporate both, evaluating properly, that is, and thus producing harmonious relations, as either Napoleon Hill or someone else had said, or also, not judgmental, that meaning evaluate where people are coming from as to the nuts and bolts of what they could be expected to do given the antecedents. Now that's kind of scientific or engineering wise, but so be it. I have to say, by the way, I'm probably not the only one under the sun with this kind of orientation to some extent. This morning I was looking at Amazon and a book popped up on addictions from a non-traditional source. A man who had spent time in corporate areas, perhaps, or entrepreneurial, I'm not sure, but also he grew up also in Detroit like I did to an extent, and he studied engineering, and then he got an MBA in, finance or something, MBA in something, Masters of Business Administration. So he looked at addictions from the vantage point of something very analytical, you might say, taking it apart piece by piece. And I think that can be lacking sometimes. Wittgenstein, too, if I have the name pronounced correctly, a great leader in the past in, you might say, word theory, linguistics. If you look, you would see he was debating, should I become an aeronautical engineer? And he went to, what was the philosopher's name? Bertrand Russell, met with him and asked, and Bertrand Russell said, well, if you show me some of your writing, I can kind of tell you something or another. And so Wittgenstein did, and Bertrand Russell said, oh, definitely not aeronautical engineering. But Wittgenstein took this skill set and applied it. I might add, too, as a soldier once, myself, and in Germany, and a tanker, I've done a little bit or more of studying of Rommel, General Rommel, and he was considered by far the most respectful of the German generals, the Desert Fox, and so on and so forth. And if you look into his background, he stood up against Hitler at a certain point in time. Much to his alacrity, you might say, he was forced to take poison so that his family could escape unscathed and he not have a dishonorable life at the end. But at any rate, he too wanted to study aeronautical engineering, but was quote-unquote encouraged to go into the military instead. Yes, how interesting that Rommel then applied basically the skill set. I think he might have been a crackerjack at mathematics in high school, as we would call it here, if I remember correctly, and applied that then to understanding not only, the nuts and bolts of being a soldier in leadership, but people. And, concerning words also then, to an extent anyway, on a continuum. So again, when we talk that, oh, they don't get me, or there's friction here, or they're judgmental, and so on and so forth. I think we need to take a look at what skill, or rather language set, is being used. What encoding mechanism? Because to simply see something is one thing. You might also almost call that intuition, but once you want to put that in symbology to preserve what you've quote unquote seen, and to speed up the process of categorizing things in a hustle and bustle world, often urban these days also, and very multitudinous in different concepts. Like New York City has at least people with 200 different religions, I understand. So, really, it's very difficult then to live under those circumstances without a symbolic representation of a variety of complex things and hitting you all so frequently fast. Chaotic, in fact. But if the symbology is twisted by free will that says, oh, you could have done better, and the other person is saying, well, no, I couldn't because of such and such, and or there's catastrophe symbology involved that makes people hypervigilant, you might say, a polite term, well then, that's not a good thing, I think. I think that then is why we have the term artist, kind of like a rubric term for anyone who thinks without using a whole bunch of such words in the free will and catastrophizing manner. The artist then is called maybe not so up when it comes to details, although that's not always the case. But they're often called somebody who is more feeling oriented than thinking oriented. Well, what do we mean if not the symbology by which they are using? I think the artist, call them the musician, call them the painter, the dancer. You might even call somebody playing a sport an artist to the extent they're not really using many words to encode what they do. It's just more, how do I do this? What move do I make? And so on and so forth. Without the use of words every 2 seconds to encode, oh, how did I flip up that basketball to get it in there? And so on and so forth. It's much more non-word oriented, and that leaves out a lot of chances then to have polluted words in general. So I would say many a great sports figure is also a great artist. And maybe that is why, good or bad, some of them are quite good with the opposite sex. For more, consult the nightlife or day life of Wilt Chamberlain, perhaps. I don't want to advocate anything, but take note of that then. As well as the word jock versus bean counter, shall we say. That's my bailiwick of analysis here on words in general. And the whole concept, and coining a new term here, that we have, I think, 2 different types of language out here to evaluate, to talk about people, to encode the aspects of people once again. And, sometimes we need to put it in simple terms. A simple word can shift everything, and the lack of a word, or the word being disrespectful, can shift it in the opposite direction. So I've coined this morning the word, for my own use it anyway, of, and I'll probably forget it here and there, the word being, or neologism being, that some encode with free cat terminology and speak thus free cat, just like speaking English or Spanish or Swahili. Some people speak free cat, and others speak non-free cat. Just to simplify things, I haven't come up with a term yet or neologism for non-free catting, but at any rate. Yeah, and I talk of this too because I've spent some time on Navajo Nation out in Arizona, and 3 times at Cherokee Indian Reservation. My grandfather collected herbs. He was from, quote, the old world. Ukraine. We built projects together in his workshop, wood projects, and much more. Yes, and my father again, Ph.D. in English literature, but he quit high school at 17, got a GED later, and so on and so forth. So a atypical background there again. And his father, a quote garbage man in Philadelphia, the ghettos. Okay, so that is my bailiwick here on language, and on actually then types of people as per language they are speaking, and how it is not just a language but a viewpoint on life, one being perhaps in some way, shape, and form far more accurate. And then, of course, then why are they not cleaning house, so to speak, in life? Why are they not venerated to the max? Because I believe it's, as a capstone on this audio here, it's these very people then who have the minimum of so-called complexity training in school, brick and mortar school, and or licensing too to do certain things in the people area, and thus also to say they're trained and to set policies in the people area. So very rarely do you find both things in one package. Very rarely. It happens to a degree, but it is very, very rare, I believe. For more on that, I would say consult a video documentary, I can't remember the exact title, about Boris Yeltsin, back in the Soviet Union, president of Russia, and so on and so forth. That was a man who, to some extent, exemplified both. He was in engineering to some extent. Also, though, much of the people, as per the nuts and bolts aspects I've been talking about, and he was quite a dynamo meeting people in general on their level. But it took some doing to polish up some rough edges. And one of the things he polished up was his language. He shifted it to a more simple, and I would say deterministic language, upon which he became a far better, far more effective leader. And that's basically my bailiwick here and what I have to say today on words, etc., etc.